alaihi wasallam implied or meant when he said this. And the first thing one looks at when he said, Qurratu aini fis salah, and that is how we look at our Islamic text, whether it's Quranic verses or hadiths. We look at the grammatical construction and then derive the essence of the meaning in that. If the Prophet ﷺ had said, Qurratu aini bis salah, it would be totally correct in terms of the way we would translate it. But the fact that he said fis salah is very, very significant. It's just from a ba to a fa. It's significant in the sense that you and I, as translating it literally, might assume that the coolness of the eyes is achieved the moment we say Allahu Akbar and we are in salah. And by using the preposition fi, what becomes clear in that saying of the Prophet ﷺ is that it's not the salah in itself that is giving the coolness, but is the environment or the situation or the structure in which you find yourself when you are making salah. It's a very subtle difference. It's not the salah that is creating the coolness, but is the structure or the position in your file. The coolness comes from that extreme, and now we're looking at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that extreme level, high level of feeling the presence of Almighty Allah. That is what gives the coolness. It's not the structure in saying Allahu Akbar, going into ruku, going into sujood, reading the tayyat, reading Surah Fatiha. It's not that. It's a very subtle difference. The moment you go into that structure of making salah, then the level of your understanding of the presence of the Almighty Allah, that is what creates the coolness. Therefore, the other hadith that says that once you get into salah, if you cannot be in that spiritual level of like almost seeing Almighty Allah, His mushahada, His presence becomes alive, and that happens with the awliya. And it's available to everybody. It's an exercise, it's an effort, the zikr, the tasbeehs, your cleanliness of your lifestyle, the purity of your heart can give that quality to anybody. And of course, with the Anbiyas and especially Rasulullah, it will be of the highest level, which we don't even strive to achieve. And salah is that 5 times a day. Then you start understanding the significance of time, which I'll deal with just now. Fi instead of bi, bis salah, he said fis salah. It's important, that aspect. The driving force must be that if we cannot see Allah or be in a state of God consciousness, we almost feel that Allah is there in front of you, then the least is to think that Almighty is seeing you. That Almighty is seeing you. And that is a little easier for the human mind and soul to understand or to be in a state where you can say, oh, Allah is watching me when I'm making salah. Now, if you are in that state of salah, there's no room for thinking about who is in your shop or who is at your workplace or who is at home. Those thoughts start going away. It's human to have those thoughts, but you need to work it out. And when people become old like myself, 40, 50 years, whatever, if I did the right thing, that by this age at least, I must have a little bit of that. That's what you are striving for. Now, if one can get even a little bit of that, not in every salah, I mean, we are human beings, but at least, even if we do it once a week, that this week's salah is better than last week's salah. And the hadith of Rasulullah says every salah was an improvement on the previous one. And in a normal lifetime, how does that not build up your spiritual status? And we're not even talking of the tasbeehs and the zikrs and the recitation of the Quran that adds to those things. So we must understand that. We also need to understand why the Prophet, why Almighty Allah ordained and ordered us to read Surah Fatiha in every rak'ah of every salah. So you end up well over in the 30s daily that you have to recite this opening surah of the Quran. It's not just at random. That surah clarifies to us, and we have to read it throughout the day, all the time, and at every other time when we're making dua and so on, because it sets the parameters of our relationship with Almighty Allah. How do we relate to Almighty Allah? Do we just sit and imagine He's the greatest? Yes, we must do those things. But here is the recipe given to us by Almighty Allah. He's telling us, this is how you establish your relationship with me. And Surah Fatiha is probably the most powerful words ever written and will ever be written. And it makes it's simple. Everybody understands it. Even if you don't know a word of Arabic, but by repetition and the meaning being read all the time, almost all of us should know it, and I think we do know it. Maybe we don't focus on it as much. And what does it emphasize? We'll go over it very briefly, just as a reminder. You probably know it, but I'm using this opportunity just to remind ourselves that the first thing after your Ta'awuz and Bismillah, what do you say? You praise Almighty Allah. Alhamdulillah. All praises to Allah. That Alif Lam with the Hamd is very significant in terms of Arabic language. So all praises. There's nothing good in this world except we have to praise Allah, Almighty Allah for everything, everything. And then we praise it. But what follows it? He is just not worthy of praise for nothing. He's Rabbul Alameen. And here already a very fundamental, this is how educational Islam is and the Quran is. You immediately are made aware that there is not one universe. The surah says Alameen. Worlds. It's not referring to one world. It's not referring to Alam. It's referring to worlds. Now, even if there were no telescopes and there was no way of finding out the millions of universes, we've already learned in our first lesson, in the first surah, that there are many, many worlds. And it all created by Almighty Allah. And we praise Him for that reason, besides all the other things that were revealed in the Quran and so on. So that is the greatness. And what is the essence of that relationship with Almighty Allah? That we should remind ourselves 5 times a day and as many other times as possible. It is around Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. It's not about the anger of Almighty Allah. It is not about the punishment of Almighty Allah. It is about He is most merciful. And it's emphasized in 2 phrases. In translation, you can use the same word in English or French or any other language for Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, and it will imply the most merciful, the most beneficent, but it has 2 separate implications. It encompasses every aspect of mercy that can ever be imagined. And I don't think our human mind can ever understand or imagine the kind of mercy that Almighty Allah has and exercises and will exercise at all times, and particularly on the Day of Judgment. Almighty doesn't want us to live in fear of Him. Therefore, first attributes, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, extremely merciful. In the minutest of reasons to forgive and send you to heaven is what Almighty is looking for. The minutest of reasons. And we have many historical incidents and examples of it. There's no time for it. So He wants to forgive. And therefore, Imam Abu Hanifa in particular, all the Imams say it, but his example is very potent. And he says that if there are 100 issues with a human being, and 99 of those are of a nature that you would want to say that person is a kafir out of 100 issues. But there is one element because of which you can say this man is a Muslim, then you use that one element and forget about the 99. Because that is what Almighty is going to do on the Day of Judgment. So who are we mortals to judge people, even if there are 99 reasons to say they are disbelievers or they are sinners, whatever. We are very quick in labeling. But what Imam Abu Hanifa is telling us there is that even if there's one slight reason, accept it. It's not our job. Leave that for the Day of Judgment. Leave that to Almighty Allah. We accept even that one point. So that is how that relationship. And this surah then goes on that we only worship Almighty Allah. And we only ask His help. And this has become a very critical component of this material age. We are seeking Almighty help for so many wrong things. The only reason or the only seeking should be your spiritual development, not your bank balance, not your career. It is your spiritual development. That's the only real prayer of a Muslim. Oh Almighty Allah, take me to the next level. Make me a pious human being. And even if I don't have the capacity, oh Almighty Allah, you are Ar-Rahman. You see now the significance of these words kick in. You are most merciful. You want me to be a good human being. I want to be a good human being, but I am weak. Give strength, remove my weak. That's the relationship that this surah is asking us. And that is what makes the salah so alive. Salah is something that's alive. You need to feel it and touch it and live it. And that's when what I started with, the coolness of the eyes come. If you get a little bit, it is said in fiqh that a minute second in your salah is enough for that salah to be accepted. Even for a minute second, you just get that momentary God consciousness, it's enough. Almighty will accept that salah as a very good salah. Just that moment. And we need to concentrate and build on it day and day night. Just for 2-3 minutes, we need to understand also the significance of time. We have become so accustomed that time is just another thing. Basically, we look at time for what's the time the next show on the TV is starting. Our relationship with time is become for those kind of things. But time is an attribute of Almighty Allah and is very much linked to Salah. That's why I'm introducing it. It's very much linked to the time. That is why 5 Salahs, Salah started with 50, became 5, but the reward of the 5 is 50. That remains. Almighty is not denying that to us at all. Time is an attribute of Allah. And being an attribute of Allah, it needs a lot of concentration, consideration, and understanding. There are 2 aspects of time that we need to understand. And one is that there are certain activities that take place at different times, and that is your salah, your fasting, it could be your hajj, and so on. These activities that revolve around the 5 pillars, you can virtually make qaza. If you miss your salah on time, you can make it up. If you, for some reason, sickness, whatever, couldn't fast, you can make it up. But there are other aspects of time you cannot make up. And that is where we miss out, because we don't even try to understand what those things are and how to handle it. One of those things around which you cannot make qaza is 4 items. In every aspect of a human being's life, you are in a state of time. And the first aspect of time is that you will be experiencing some form of ni'mah, some form of blessing. That's one state. You will find yourself, every human being, whether you realize it or not, there'll be a state of blessing. But there are 3 others. The second one could be musibah, difficulties. And difficulties not in a negative sense. We have become accustomed to thinking of difficulties as problems. Difficulties in most cases, and when I say most cases, in almost above 90% or 99%, is a training that's taking place. It's for spiritual reasons. And you will find yourself. So it's not like you cursed. Musibah is not a curse. Musibah is a blessing. Many awliya Allah, you'll find their sayings. Oh Allah, why am I not in difficulties? Why am I so comfortable? Have you forgotten me? Because one of the signs of Allah being in touch with you and you are in a good relationship is difficulties. Time doesn't allow to expand how it all works, but that's the second aspect. So first is ni'mah, second is musibah, difficulties. The third thing that you can never make qada of, and you will find it, and that is God consciousness. In other words, obedience of Almighty Allah. You cannot make qada of that. You need to be in a mental state of obedience all the time. How you do it, you probably know, but there must be a consciousness about it. And the fourth one is masiyah. If you're not in a state of ni'mah and a state of difficulty and a state of God consciousness, then you are in a state of sinning. And each one has a solution. When there is ni'mah, then Almighty Allah wants you to be thankful. Shukr comes in. And when there is musibah, for whatever reason, Almighty wants to see, can my slave make sabr? So in order to test your ability to make sabr, there will be musibah. And that is why the awliya look for, they don't strive for musibah, but it's plead to Almighty Allah, keep me in a state through difficulties that I'm always conscious of you, which is a third state. You must be God conscious all the time. And finally, if you're in a state of sin, the solution for that is tawbah. But these four conditions, every human being will find himself, herself at all times. And there is no qada for it. It's done, time has passed. What I've said a minute ago is gone now. I've said it, it's finished. It's recorded. It's a done thing. So there are certain things related to time that you cannot undo. You make tawbah, you make shukr. Those are the things linked to it. So we need to understand the significance of salah in terms of in which way does it become coolness of the eye. And the second thing is with relation to time, treat time as something that's alive. It's not about the clock. Time is not about the clock. If you study a bit of time and space, or read about it, or show interest in it, you'll come to other dimensions. Time and space is a very essential part of our iman, and we need to understand that. And these discussions, why does the Quran talk of time in terms of the moon, rising of the moon, and rising of the sun, and the coming of the day, and the coming of the night? That's all science lessons. That is why Muslims became such powerful scientists. The Quran has got all these things embedded, and therefore I chose, knowing that the children might not be a bit of a more serious topic in such a short time, but I merely want to make you aware that find out more about the significance of Salah and how important it is for you to build your spiritual life around Salah. Similarly, understand time and what is time about. That there are certain things that you can repeat and make up, and there are certain aspects of time that you can't make up. What's done is done, you have to move on. But there are remedies in terms like tawbah and those things. So a Muslim is a being that is very, very conscious of Allah all the time. There is no other way. And if you build an ummah around little principles like this, then the turnaround and the revival will come. Our revival will never come by taking over governments. Our revival will never come through so many other things that we wish to do. It will only come by each one of us, you, me, starting with me, our mashayikh, our children, everybody deciding, I want to have a relationship with Almighty Allah around the message of Surah Fatiha. That He is our Creator. He is the Lord of the worlds. He is Ar-Rahman. He is Ar-Rahim. We can only worship Him and we can only ask help from Him. We have to make that a conscious, living situation of every Muslim. So let us pray that we can understand the value of time, understand why Salah is compulsory and has to be made as far as possible on time with Jama'ah, even at home. Get your wife, get your children, get your neighbors, somebody, but try and have a Jama'ah if you can't get to the Masjid. That's the first requirement, to be a congregational thing. And if you can't, then you do it alone. But there's no compromise on Salah. Jazakumullah.
Assalamu alaikum wa